If you grew up gaming, this blonde-haired, green suit-wearing, sword-wielding kid is nothing new to you. The Zelda franchise has been nothing short of successful. It's no surprise to hear that Nintendo had a very successful release of the newest game in the series, Breath of the Wild. It revolutionized the Zelda formula and brought new, exciting gameplay elements to the table. With the success of Breath of the Wild, we decided to go back in time and take a look at the third game in the series, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past.
After the release of Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, production began on A Link to the Past. A Link to the Past was originally set to be released on the NES, but after a year of development, Nintendo decided to release this new game with their new system, the Super Nintendo. As we know from Super Mario World, the Super Nintendo allowed the game to have more detailed graphics and more features, which brings up an interesting fact regarding the game. Most Super Nintendo cartridges had a storage space of 4 megabits, or 512 kilobytes, but Link to the Past broke the mold and went with an 8 megabit cartridge, which is 1 megabyte.
This increase in storage space allowed developers to create a very large, detailed world for Link to explore. Nintendo actually found ways to save space on the cartridge as well. This included using a graphic compression method, which limited the color depth from 16 color tiles to 8. Another way Nintendo found to save space was to eliminate duplication. This was done by making the Dark World, which will be discussed later, almost an identical layout to the Light World. In addition to that, the Dark World only exists as an overlay in the game's ROM. Upon starting the game, we're greeted with the famous Triforce symbol, followed with a splash screen of the Zelda logo in front of a castle and a moat. In typical game fashion, waiting long enough for the title screen will trigger a cutscene explaining the story.
However, hitting start will take you to the player select screen. This is just a load save menu where you can also create new games, copy existing game files, and erase older files. As with most games around this time period, you're only given 3 save slots on the cartridge. Clicking on an empty file will then advance you to the screen to register your name, which could be up to 6 characters long. After entering your name, you're taken back to the player select screen where you can now select your newly created profile. This part of the process is actually confusing. If you're creating a new profile, why wouldn't hitting end on the player creation screen take you right into gameplay? There's no reason to actually go back to player select to verify you want to play as the character you literally just created. After finally selecting your character, you're taken into the game.
This is where the story begins. We see Link laying in bed when he receives a telepathic message from Zelda saying, "Help me." This is where we first learn that Zelda is locked away in a dungeon. We also learn that a wizard named Gannon has captured Zelda. He has taken over the castle and is trying to break the 7 Wise Men's seal. This seal was used to imprison a dark wizard named Gannon in the Dark World. The Dark World used to be a sacred land until Gannon obtained the Triforce and used its power to turn the world to darkness. Your adventure begins right after you're told by Link's uncle that you're not allowed to leave the house while he steps out. We didn't think of it at the time, but I guess this entire world is screwed if you decide to stay in bed. After Link disobeys this order, he finds his way to the castle to rescue Princess Zelda. He then finds his uncle who's wounded, and he gives Link his sword and shield and tells him it's now his responsibility to rescue Zelda. Once Zelda is rescued, she takes Link to a sanctuary where he is told that he needs to gather 3 pendants in order to obtain the Master Sword, which will be used to defeat Ganon. Once Link does this, he heads to go fight him. At the end of this fight, before his defeat, Ganon's last action is to send Link to the Dark World. It's here where Link must rescue the 7 descendants of the 7 sages in order to use their power to break the barrier around Ganon's tower.
When the game starts, you notice right away that it's in the format of just about any SNES RPG from that time period, a top-down perspective that we're all used to. Even though it doesn't particularly stand out at first, Zelda has a very distinct and advanced look. The main world is split up into different areas, such as mountains, forests, deserts, meadows, and dungeons. The color schemes for each area vary slightly. Obviously, the desert area is all brown, and the meadows are all green. You can see the major differences when you get to the dungeons. Each is colored differently and has little details that are different, so it doesn't feel like you're in a remake of a previous dungeon. As with any Zelda game, the music is nothing short of amazing. Everyone always connects amazing music to the Zelda franchise, but very few know that this game is what established the music for the Zelda series. The Zelda theme song, Hyrule Overture, expectedly shows up in this game, but songs like Princess Zelda's theme, Ganondorf's theme, and the Hyrule Castle song all originated with this game. It's actually a huge accomplishment for Nintendo, making music so amazing so early on that it just sticks it out for the remaining games to follow. Nintendo actually does a really good job at keeping with consistency. If we look at the Sonic series, you can tell that the music was trying to keep up with the times by constantly changing its music, instead of a reimagination of the original soundtrack.
If you played the very first Zelda game, then jumping into A Link to the Past would be no struggle at all. Just like the very first game, A Link to the Past has a top-down view where the D-pad navigates you around. Reaching the edge of the screen will prompt the level to move to the next screen of the level. Just like the first game, this gives you the sense of it being an open world game, even though there are several limitations to what you can actually do. If you're familiar with The Legend of Zelda 2, which came out a year after the original, you would know that Nintendo tried to change up the gameplay style for that game. This involved having Link travel left to right as a side-scroller instead of the top-down view. However, to keep with the original method of movement, this game would go back to a top-down view when traveling to new levels. A Link to the Past goes back to the original style of Zelda and removes all of the side-scrolling aspects of Zelda 2. Aside from reverting back to the original style, they also added new features into this game such as walking diagonal and having arrows as separate items. As if this game wasn't the start of enough new things for the Zelda series, we also get introduced to a concept that would ultimately become a major trademark in the Zelda world: parallel universes. Most of the game is spent in the Light World, which is the ordinary Hyrule that we all know and love. The Dark World, which is a corrupted version of Hyrule, can be traveled to using special teleporting pads.
The Dark World is often used to find hidden items, such as heart pieces, and to work in conjunction with the Light World to reach areas you can't typically access. A good example of this is the Turtle Rock Dungeon, where you have to use the Dark World to gain access to the roof of the dungeon in order to then transfer to the Light World and open up the front door. Knowing where to go and what to do in this game takes a lot of playthroughs to completely understand. Whether you walked by a wall that could be blown up without realizing it, or completely forgot about an area you wanted to explore at a later time, the replayability of this game can keep you entertained for a very long time. So what about weapons? We know in the original game he had a sword, a bow, and bombs. So is there anything new? Well, the answer is obviously yes. A Link to the Past was the first to introduce the hookshot, the master sword, the spin attack technique, and the Pegasus boots. These have since become a staple in the franchise. Well, now what? We have cool new weapons, new features, and the ability to travel between worlds. Now you just travel from dungeon to dungeon, trying to figure out how to navigate to the end of each level and defeating each boss.
If you're new to the game and just starting out, you'll probably think that the dungeons really aren't that bad, and they really aren't in the beginning. Once you get farther in the game, the dungeons start to feel as if they're impossible to get through. There were several dungeons that had us scratching our heads trying to figure out where to go next. This led to several deaths trying to figure out the right way. When we finally found out that right way, we would get attacked by an enemy we didn't know was there, and it would send us right back to the beginning of the dungeon. That being said, this game has an amazing balance of adventure and puzzle gameplay. You can also pick up small side quests throughout your adventure, along with a few mini-games you can find if you go exploring. But after you're done exploring, you've beat all the dungeons, and you don't think you can find any more items, it's off to fight the final boss, Gannon. When it comes to final bosses, Gannon really isn't too much of a challenge. It definitely takes a few attempts to learn patterns, but that's pretty much it. A little bit of patience and you're pretty much set. After everything's said and done, you find the Triforce and then are shown cutscenes of everything being back to normal once again. And after we get ourselves together after this heartfelt moment of accomplishment, we have to sit back and ask ourselves just one thing. Considering this is only the third game in the Zelda series, when you look back at the original game made only 4 years earlier, you can definitely tell that Nintendo stepped up the quality of this series and laid down the structures necessary for future Zelda games to continue growing. That's the type of ingenuity and innovation that makes this game exciting.
The fact that you can go through this game multiple times and find extra items or rupees you didn't previously know about, or even figure out how to make it to an area you always saw but never knew how to get to, shows that Nintendo kept the player in mind when designing this game. Replayability is always a big deal, even in today's games, and it's this replayability that shows us that The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past holds up to the test of time and is definitely a game worth revisiting at some point.